The velvet box snapped shut with a click that echoed the closing of a door on a life they had built. Bryony Sloane stared at it, resting on the cold marble of their kitchen island, her hand instinctively cradling the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy. Inside that box was the diamond necklace Elias had promised she would wear to the Starlight Gala, the crowning social event of their year. But the necklace, like the promise, was no longer for her. His words, clipped and devoid of warmth, still hung in the air between them, more chilling than the sterile minimalist design of their penthouse. "You're just not event-ready, Bryony. It's for the best." He had replaced her, his pregnant wife, for the sake of appearances. But he never could have imagined who would be holding her hand when she walked through those ballroom doors later that night. The silence in the penthouse on the 52nd floor of the Oracle building was a living entity. It breathed in the scent of expensive leather and Windex, and exhaled a profound, soul-crushing emptiness. Just minutes ago, it had been filled with Elias Faulkner's smooth, rationalizing voice, each word a carefully polished stone thrown at Bryony's heart. Bryony's reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a woman she barely recognized. It wasn't just the pregnancy which had softened her angles and brought a new, vulnerable curve to her body. It was the look in her eyes, a wounded disbelief. She and Elias had been a team. She was the quiet architect, whose eye for structure and foundation had helped him see the bones of a deal while he was the charismatic face of Faulkner and Davies real estate. The man who could sell a dream with a handshake and a dazzling smile. She had set aside her own promising career to support his meteoric rise, a sacrifice made gladly for the future they were building, for the child she now carried. "It's a business necessity," Soph, he'd said, adjusting the cuffs of his $1,000 shirt. He wouldn't look at her directly, his gaze fixed on his own handsome reflection in the chrome of the espresso machine. "We need to project a certain image. Power. Unencumbered energy. Roger Davies himself will be there. We're on the cusp of the big league." Unencumbered. The word had caught in her throat, tasting like poison. Is that what our baby is? Elias? An encumbrance. He'd finally turned his face a mask of practiced patience, the kind a parent uses on a difficult child. "Don't be dramatic. This is about one night. You're tired all the time. Your ankles are swollen. It's better for you to rest." He'd gestured vaguely at her stomach. Better for the situation. The situation, she whispered to the empty room now. Not our baby. Not our son. The situation. The final brutal blow was the name he'd let slip. He was taking Katrina Bell. Katrina was a junior associate at his firm, a woman who was all sharp angles, sharper ambition, and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. Bryony had seen the way Katrina looked at Elias during the company's last holiday party. Not with admiration, but with the predatory gaze of a shark that had scented a path to bigger waters. She'd seen the late-night texts he'd dismissed as urgent project details. Her intuition had screamed, but her love had told it to be quiet. Now her love was silent, and her intuition was a roaring inferno. He hadn't just uninvited her. He had replaced her with her replacement. A wave of nausea wholly unrelated to her pregnancy washed over her. She stumbled to the bathroom, her hand braced against the cool, imported Italian marble wall. Collapsing onto the heated floor, she let the sobs come, deep, ragged sounds of a world breaking apart. It wasn't just the humiliation of the ball. It was the casual cruelty, the dismissal of her as a person, as his wife, as the mother of his child. She was a line item in his life that had become inconvenient, a variable in his equation for success that needed to be temporarily removed. She cried for the woman she had been, the bright, hopeful girl who had fallen for a charming, ambitious man. She cried for the plans they had made, the names they had debated for their son, the future that now felt like a cruel fantasy. Lying on the cold tiles with the distant indifferent hum of the city below, Bryony Sloane felt utterly and completely alone. Hours bled into one another. The sun, a fiery orange ball, began its descent over the Hudson, painting of the sky in hues of fear and sorrow. The light streamed into the penthouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, forgotten promise. Bryony pushed herself up. Her face was blotchy, her eyes raw. She caught her reflection again. But this time, something else flickered behind the pain. It was anger, a cold, clear, diamond-hard fury that began to crystallize in the ruins of her heart. He thought she was weak, an encumbrance, a tired, swollen woman to be hidden away while he and his mistress paraded around, securing his future. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Elias Faulkner. He had forgotten the woman who could command a boardroom with a quiet presentation, the woman who could see the fatal flaw in a building's design from a single blueprint, the woman who had grit woven into her very soul. She walked back into the living area, her steps now steady. Her gaze fell upon her laptop sitting on a side table. An idea wild and audacious sparked in her mind. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, armed with nothing but a memory and a sliver of professional pride. Years ago, before she had shelved her career, Bryony had run a small but innovative non-profit called Urban Canvas, focused on creating sustainable community-centric green spaces in neglected city areas. They were brilliant, but broke. In a last-ditch effort, she had secured a meeting with the Knight Foundation, the philanthropic behemoth founded by the legendary and legendarily reclusive tech billionaire Donovan Knight. She hadn't met the man himself, not in person. The meeting was with his board. But as she was packing up her presentation, a low, calm voice had spoken from the doorway. He was older, with eyes that seemed to see everything, and he was holding her proposal. It was Donovan Knight. He hadn't been on the schedule. He told her he'd watched her presentation via a live feed to his office. "Your vision is 20 years ahead of its time, Ms. Sloane," he had said, his voice resonating with quiet power. "The board is too conservative. They'll fund another hospital wing. It's safer." He handed her his private business card. It was thick black cardstock, with nothing but a name and a number. "The world will catch up to you eventually. When it does, or when you need a partner who understands that a foundation is meant to build the future, not just patch up the present, call this number. No assistants, no gatekeepers. Just me." She had kept the card, a memento of a dream that had almost been. She had never dared to use it. Until now. Her hands trembled as she pulled the card from a keepsake box in her old desk drawer. The number was stark against the black. This was insane. Calling one of the wealthiest men in the world on the night of a gala, he was sponsoring a gala her husband was attending with his mistress. What would she even say? She looked down at her belly, and her son gave a gentle kick as if in encouragement. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. This was about his future. A future with a mother who did not crumble, who did not hide. A mother who fought back. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, She dialed the number. It rang once. Twice. She was about to hang up her courage, failing, when the line connected. Knight. The voice was exactly as she remembered. Calm, direct, authoritative. Mr. Knight. She began, her own voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat. My name is Bryony Sloane. We spoke once, several years ago, about my project, Urban Canvas. There was a pause. For a terrifying second, she thought he would have no memory of her, that she would be dismissed as just another crank call. I remember Ms. Sloane, he said, and she could have wept with relief. Sustainable architecture with a social conscience. You wanted to build a park on top of a derelict warehouse in the Bronx. I told you the board were fools. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. Yes, that was me. Your call is timely. I was just reviewing the guest list for this ridiculous Starlight Gala I'm being forced to attend tonight. Your husband Elias Faulkner is listed. I assume you're calling to say you'll be joining him? The dam broke. The words came tumbling out, not a polished pitch, but a raw, honest confession of her situation. She told him about her husband's cruelty, about Katrina Bell, about being cast aside because her pregnancy was an inconvenience to his ambition. She didn't ask for pity. She framed it as a business proposition, born of desperation. Mr. Knight, my life has just been fundamentally restructured. I need to secure a future for my child, and I can't do that by hiding. I need to relaunch my work. The Starlight Gala is for Children's Hope. The most influential people in New York will be there. I need to be there too. Not as a victim, but as the founder of the Sloane Initiative. I need a sponsor, not for the night, but for a new beginning. I know this is an insane, unprofessional request, but you told me to call when I needed a partner to build the future. Well, my future just started today. The silence on the other end of the line stretched on, and Bryony held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had laid her entire broken soul bare. Finally, Donovan Knight spoke again. His voice had lost its dispassionate edge, replaced by something else, a note of steel. Ms. Sloane, he said slowly. I despise bullies, and I detest men who mistake kindness for weakness. Your husband is making a grave error tonight, but his error will be your opportunity. He paused. I am the lead sponsor of tonight's event. It's dreadfully boring, and I was planning on making a token appearance and leaving. But you have just given me a reason to stay. You don't need a sponsor for the night, Bryony. You need an ally, a partner. Be ready in 90 minutes. My car will be downstairs. Bryony was stunned into silence. And Bryony, Donovan Knight added his voice low and firm. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. Tonight we are not just attending a ball. We are making a statement. The line went dead. Bryony stared at her phone, her mind reeling. The despair that had crippled her only an hour ago was gone, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating surge of adrenaline. She was not just going to the ball. She was going to war. 90 minutes. It was an impossible timeline that paradoxically made everything possible. There was no time for doubt, no space for fear. There was only action. Bryony's first move was to walk into her and Elias's expansive walk-in closet. On one side hung Elias's meticulously organized rows of bespoke suits and designer shirts. On the other, her own wardrobe, which had recently trended towards comfortable maternity wear and elegant but safe choices. Her eyes scanned past them, searching for the powerful Donovan Knight had spoken of. Her gaze landed on a garment bag, at the very back, a purchase from a year ago she'd never had the nerve to wear. It was a gown by a couturier, known for dressing royalty and titans of industry, a deep emerald green silk that shimmered like a forest pool at midnight. She had bought it on a whim, a ghost of the audacious woman she used to be. It wasn't a maternity dress, but its empire waist design and flowing A-line skirt might just work. She slipped it on. The silk was cool against her feverish skin. It fit. Not perfectly, but beautifully. The high waist sat just above her baby bump, cascading down in a waterfall of rich fabric that made her look not hidden or swollen, but regal, ethereal. The deep V neckline was daring, but the overall effect was one of commanding elegance. It was the armor she needed. Next, her jewelry box. Elias had bought her plenty of pretty delicate things over the years, tasteful but ultimately forgettable. She pushed them aside. Her hand closed around a piece her grandmother had left, her a stunning Art Deco necklace of platinum and onyx. It was bold, almost severe, a statement of strength and heritage. It settled perfectly against her collarbones, a stark, beautiful contrast to the soft green of the gown. As she worked, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "A team is on its way to your service entrance. They are from me. Let them in." DK. Minutes later, her service bell rang. Standing outside were a man and a woman, both dressed in discreet black. They were not stylists in the flashy reality TV sense. They radiated a quiet, formidable competence. Ms. Sloane, the woman who introduced herself as Lena, said with a small, respectful nod, "Mr. Knight sent us. I'm here for hair and makeup. My colleague George is here for security and to ensure your smooth exit." Bryony was floored. This was a level of operational efficiency she had only read about. She led Lena to the master bathroom, a space that now felt like a battleground being repurposed into a command center. Lena worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She assessed Bryony's face, her gown, her jewelry. "We're not hiding the pregnancy," Lena stated, more as a commander issuing an order than a stylist making a suggestion. "We are celebrating it. The glow is your greatest asset. We highlight that. Power and serenity." She used shades of gold and bronze on Bryony's eyes, making them look luminous and fierce. She sculpted her cheekbones, gave her a lip color that was a shade deeper than natural, suggesting a woman who was not to be trifled with. Her hair was swept up into a complex but graceful chignon that showcased the formidable lines of the onyx necklace and the elegant column of her neck. As Lena put the finishing touches on her, Bryony looked in the mirror. The tear-stained broken woman from a few hours ago was gone. In her place stood a queen. She looked powerful. Yes, but more than that, she looked serene. She looked like a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who was standing on the precipice of her own life, not falling from the edge of someone else's. Meanwhile, George, the silent security man, had done a quiet sweep of the apartment. He spoke into a discreet communications device in his wrist. "Asset is secure. Preparing for extraction in 10. Have the vehicle ready at the south service exit. No press." Extraction. Asset. This was Donovan Knight's world. It was a world of precision power and absolute control. A world away from Elias's sphere of flashy sales pitches and fragile ego. Just as Lena packed up her kit, Bryony's phone buzzed again. It was Elias. A picture message. It was him and Katrina posing in front of a mirror. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a smug, triumphant look on his face. Katrina was draped over him wearing a glittering, skin-tight silver dress. The diamond necklace was around Katrina's throat. The caption read, "Wish you were here. Having a great time." The cruelty was so blatant, so juvenile, it was almost laughable. A month ago, it would have shattered her. An hour ago, it would have made her sick. Now, looking at her reflection in the mirror, she felt a strange sense of pity for him. He was a boy playing king, completely unaware that a true power was about to enter the game. She didn't reply. She simply deleted the message. "It is time, Ms. Sloane," George said from the doorway. Lena gave her a final look. "You look magnificent," she said, and for the first time, a genuine smile touched her lips. "Go get what is yours." Bryony walked out of the apartment she had shared with Elias, not looking back. George led her down a service elevator, bypassing the grand lobby. As the doors opened into a private underground garage, a sleek black Bentley, the kind that whispers wealth rather than shouts, it purred silently. The driver, also in a discreet suit, held the door open. The interior of the car was a cocoon of silent luxury. As they pulled out into the city traffic, Bryony finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The adrenaline was still coursing through her, but it was now tempered with a steely resolve. The car did not head straight for the Grand Plaza Hotel, where the gala was being held. Instead, it pulled up to a discreet ivy-covered brownstone in the West Village. George opened her door. "Mr. Knight will join you here. He prefers to avoid the main entrance scrum." The door to the brownstone opened before she reached it, revealing Donovan Knight. He was taller than she remembered, dressed in a classic, exquisitely cut tuxedo. He wasn't handsome in the conventional, polished way Elias was. His was a face carved by intelligence and experience, his grey streaked hair adding to his air of authority. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, assessed her in an instant. He took in the gown, the necklace the determined set of her jaw. A slow smile of approval spread across his face. "Ms. Sloane," he said, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. "Bryony, you look like a woman who can build empires." "I intend to," she replied, her voice steady. He offered her his arm. "Good, because we are about to lay the first brick." He led her inside, not to a drawing room, but to a high-tech office. A massive screen on the wall showed a live feed of the gala's entrance. The red carpet was a frenzy of flashing cameras and reporters. "Standard reconnaissance," Donovan explained, gesturing to the screen. "Know the terrain before you enter the field." He pointed to a figure on the screen. "There. That's Roger Davies, your husband's boss. A man who respects only two things, money and power. He is currently talking to Senator Michelson, a key figure on the Urban Development Committee." He was giving her a battlefield briefing. He wasn't treating her like a scorned wife needing a white knight. He was treating her like a general, and he was her strategist. They watched for a few moments as Elias and Katrina made their grand entrance. The cameras swarmed them. Elias was in his element, preening, soaking in the attention. Katrina looked thrilled, clinging to his arm, the stolen diamonds glittering under the flashbulbs. "He's peacocking," Donovan observed, a note of disdain in his voice. "He believes this is his moment of triumph. He has no idea that he is merely the opening act." He turned away from the screen to face her fully. His expression was serious. "Now for our terms of engagement. Tonight, you are not my date. You are my business partner. We are here to announce the relaunch of your vision, backed by the full weight of the Knight Foundation." I am not rescuing you, Bryony. I am investing in you. The revenge is simply a serendipitous byproduct. He picked up a sleek black portfolio from his desk and handed it to her. A preliminary proposal for the Sloan Initiative. I had my team draft it this past hour. It outlines a seed funding of $5 million to begin feasibility studies on 3 of your original urban canvas projects. It is real. It is effective immediately. Bryony opened the portfolio. Her hands trembled as she read the words. It was her dream, not just reviewed, but magnified, empowered. Tears pricked her eyes. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he said gently. Just succeed. That will be thanks enough. He glanced at his watch. They have just begun the cocktail hour. The key players are all inside. Shall we? He offered her his arm again. This time, when she took it, it felt different. It was no longer the arm of a rescuer. It was the arm of a partner, an ally. As they walked towards the door, Bryony felt the last vestiges of the victim fall away from her. She was not Elias Faulkner's discarded wife. She was Bryony Sloan, founder of the Sloan Initiative, and she was about to make her entrance. The Grand Plaza's ballroom was a testament to obscene wealth. Chandeliers dripping with crystals the size of fists hung from a gilded ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the city's elite. The air hummed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes and the distant strains of a string quartet. This was Elias Faulkner's natural habitat, the glittering pond in which he was determined to be the biggest fish. And, for the first hour, he was. With Katrina Bell on his arm, a sparkling accessory that validated his sense of virility and power, Elias moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a master salesman. He shook hands with bankers, laughed with tech bros, and shared a conspiratorial whisper with a city councilman. Katrina, for her part, played the role of the adoring partner flawlessly. She laughed at the right moments, touched his arm with possessive reverence, and angled her body so the stolen necklace caught the light for every society photographer. Elias, darling, Roger Davies is looking over. Katrina murmured, her voice a purr. He's with Senator Michelson. This is your chance. Elias's heart gave a little flutter of ambition. Davies was the silver-haired kingmaker of Faulkner, and Davies, a man whose approval he craved with a desperate hunger. He straightened his bow tie, plastered on his most confident smile, and steered Katrina towards them. Roger, Senator, Elias boomed, extending a hand. A magnificent evening for a worthy cause. Roger Davies, a man with eyes like chips of granite, gave him a curt nod. Faulkner, good of you to come. And this is... His gaze flickered over Katrina, appraising and dismissive. Katrina Bell, Elias said smoothly. One of our brightest rising stars at the firm. I see. Davies said, his tone suggesting he saw a great deal. But before the awkward silence could curdle, a sudden hush fell over the section of the ballroom nearest the grand entrance. The low hum of conversation faltered. Heads began to turn one by one, like dominoes falling in a line. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd, growing from a murmur to a palpable buzz. Every phone that had been discreetly tucked away was suddenly raised cameras pointing towards the arched doorway. Elias, annoyed at the interruption, turned to see what the commotion was about. And then his world stopped. Framed in the magnificent archway, bathed in the light of the chandeliers, stood Bryony. His Bryony. But it was not the Bryony he had left crying in their penthouse. This was not the tired, comfortable woman he had deemed not event-ready. This was a goddess. The emerald green of her gown was a slash of vibrant life in a sea of black tuxedos and glittering but safe dresses. The onyx at her throat was a declaration of war. Her pregnancy was not a flaw to be hidden, but a source of radiant power, making her seem both formidable and divine. She was breathtaking, and she was holding the hand of Donovan Knight, not just standing next to him, not on his arm, in a polite, formal gesture. Her hand was held firmly, protectively in his. It was a gesture of profound intimacy and partnership that screamed volumes more than a simple public appearance. Donovan Knight, the billionaire phantom, the man who never attended these events for more than a fleeting moment, was standing there looking at Bryony with an expression of deep, undisguised admiration. Elias's smile froze on his face, a rictus of horror. The blood drained from his head, leaving a roaring sound in his ears. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. How did she even know Donovan Knight? Katrina's grip on his arm tightened her perfectly manicured nails, digging into his bicep. "Elias, what the hell is that?" she hissed, her voice tight with panic. "That's your wife." Roger Davies's granite eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He looked from Elias's shocked face to the radiant vision at the door and back again. The contempt that had been simmering just below the surface of his expression now bloomed into full-blown disdain. "Faulkner," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You have some explaining to do." But Elias couldn't speak. He could only watch as Donovan Knight led Bryony into the room. The crowd parted for them as if they were royalty. The people Elias had been so desperate to impress were now tripping over themselves to catch Knight's eye, their gazes flicking from the billionaire to the stunning woman at his side, raw curiosity and admiration on their faces. The string quartet seemed to falter. The society photographers, who had been content snapping pictures of B-list celebrities and wannabes, now swarmed towards the entrance, their flashes creating a blinding, strobing wall of light. Donovan guided Bryony towards the center of the room, his hand never leaving hers. He moved with an unhurried gravitational pull, the true center of power in the ballroom. He paused to greet Senator Michelson, completely ignoring Elias and Roger Davies, who stood frozen just a few feet away. "Senator," Donovan said, his voice carrying easily in the now quieter room. "A pleasure. I want to introduce you to my new partner. This is Ms. Bryony Sloan, the founder of the soon-to-be relaunched Sloan Initiative." He used her maiden name. The cut was so deep, so precise, Elias felt it like a physical blow. Senator Michelson, a man Elias had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months, beamed at Bryony. "Ms. Sloan, an absolute honor. Donovan has spoken of nothing else for the past week. He says your vision for sustainable urban development is revolutionary. We must talk." Elias's mind fractured. Spoken of nothing else for the past week. This wasn't a last-minute arrangement. This was a plan, a coordinated strategic demolition of his entire world. He finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic sound. "Bryony." She turned to him. Her eyes, luminous and powerful, met his. There was no hatred in them, no anger, just a calm, cool pity that was infinitely more devastating. She looked at him as if he were a stranger, a minor obstacle she had already mentally cleared from her path. "Elias," she said, her voice even. "I don't believe you've been introduced to my business partner, Mr. Donovan Knight." Donovan turned his gaze on Elias, and for the first time Elias understood the difference between being rich and being powerful. Elias's wealth was a performance. Donovan's power was a fundamental state of being. Knight's blue eyes were like ice. "Mr. Faulkner," Donovan said, his voice a quiet blade, "I believe you are acquainted with Miss Sloane." He glanced down at Katrina, his eyes sweeping over the diamond necklace. "A lovely piece. I trust the original owner won't be wanting it back." Katrina flushed a deep mottled red, her hand instinctively flying to her throat. In that one sentence, Donovan Knight had branded her a thief in front of the most influential people in New York. Her social currency, so carefully curated, had just been incinerated. Before Elias could stammer out a response, the gala's host, a famous news anchor, stepped up to the main microphone on the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, it is time for our main event, the Starlight Auction." A wave of relief washed over Elias. The auction. This was his chance to recover. He was planning to bid on the headline item, the naming rights to a new pediatric wing at the city hospital. A splashy 7-figure donation would put him back in the spotlight, show his power, and erase this humiliation. The bidding started. It quickly climbed past 500,000, then 1 million. Finally, it was down to 2 bidders, Elias and a rival real estate developer. The room watched enthralled. 1.5 million, Elias yelled, his voice strained, desperate to reclaim his territory. His rival hesitated, then shook his head, conceding. A smattering of applause broke out. Elias felt a sliver of his bravado return. He glanced at Roger Davies, hoping to see a flicker of restored respect. Davies was watching, but his face was unreadable. 1.5 million going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. 5 million, a calm voice stated from the center of the room. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. All heads swiveled back to Donovan Knight. He hadn't even raised his hand. He had simply spoken. The auctioneer was flustered. I have $5 million from Mr. Donovan Knight." Elias felt like he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't compete with that. He was finished. But Donovan wasn't done. He held up a hand for silence. "And," he announced, his voice resonating with authority, "the Knight Foundation will of course be funding the new pediatric wing. But my $5 million bid tonight is for something else. It is the initial seed money to launch a vital new enterprise I am proud to be partnering with, an initiative that embodies the spirit of tonight's gala, investing in a better future for our children." He turned and smiled at Bryony, a smile of genuine pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, this donation officially launches the Sloane Initiative under the brilliant leadership of its founder, Bryony Sloane." The room exploded in applause, louder and more genuine than any before. It wasn't just applause for a generous donation. It was the sound of a new star being born. Roger Davies was clapping, a slow, calculating smile now on his face as he looked at Bryony with newfound respect. Senator Michelson was patting her on the shoulder. The city's power players were surrounding her, congratulating her, wanting a piece of her. She was the center of the universe, and Elias Faulkner was a ghost standing on the edge of the void, watching the life he had thrown away, being crowned. Katrina had already vanished from his side, slipping away into the crowd like the wraith she was. He was utterly, devastatingly alone. Bryony caught his eye one last time across the crowded room. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of triumph or malice. It was a nod of dismissal. A final goodbye. Then she turned back to her new life, her hand held securely in Donovan Knight's, her face illuminated by the brilliant, blinding light of her own future. The fallout from the Starlight Gala was not a slow burn. It was a detonation. By the time the last of the champagne had been drunk, and the limousines had spirited away the city's elite, Elias Faulkner's social and professional life lay in smouldering ruins. The story was simply too delicious, too perfectly archetypal for the high society ecosystem to ignore. He left the ball alone, a phantom drifting through the dregs of a party that had only hours before felt like his coronation. Katrina had texted him a single venomous message: "You're a fraud. Lose my number," before he'd even made it to the valet. The terse finality of it was like a slap. His so-called friends, the men and women whose favor he had so carefully cultivated, now averted their eyes, melting into the dispersing crowd whenever he approached. The chill was absolute, a social permafrost from which he knew there would be no thaw. The drive back to the penthouse was a surreal journey through a city that no longer felt like his own. The towering, brilliantly lit skyscrapers that had always filled him with a sense of ownership and ambition now seemed to mock him, their lights like a million judgmental eyes. He was an outsider, looking in a ghost, haunting his own life. He let himself into the apartment, and the silence that greeted him was a physical weight. It was no longer the serene, minimalist quiet he had curated as a status symbol. It was the profound, suffocating silence of a tomb. Every polished surface, every piece of designer furniture seemed to reflect his colossal failure. He walked through the space, his footsteps echoing unnervingly on the marble floors. He half expected to see Bryony curled on the sofa waiting for him with tears and recriminations. The confrontation he had dreaded now felt like a luxury he would be denied. The apartment was empty. A quick, frantic search of their walk-in closet revealed the first clue that this had been more than a spur-of-the-moment act of defiance. Her most cherished personal items were gone: the Art Deco necklace, a few key pieces of clothing, a box of personal keepsakes from her old desk. This wasn't just a reaction, it was an evacuation. She had been planning her exit while he was preening for his mistress. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. He hadn't just misjudged her mood. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he was married to. He collapsed onto the edge of their perfectly made bed, the bed they would never share again, and stared at his phone, watching the first tendrils of the story snake their way through social media. The humiliation was just beginning. The next morning, his fears were realized in spectacular fashion. The city's most influential and feared society blogger, Penelope Vance, published her recap of the gala. Her column, The Vance Verdict, was required reading for anyone who was anyone, and she had taken to her subject with the vicious glee of a master butcher. The headline was a masterpiece of schadenfreude. Night's new dame, Billionaire, backs spurned wife in gala power, play for the ages. Elias's hands trembled as he read the prose on his tablet, the coffee he'd just brewed turning to acid in his stomach. While the borscht belt comedians say, "Take my wife, please," real estate hotshot Elias Faulkner took the adage a bit too literally last night, the column began. He arrived at the Starlight Gala with a tragically overdressed associate, Ms. Katrina Bell, clinging to his arm like shrink wrap. Ms. Bell wore a diamond necklace that sources say bore a startling resemblance to one Mr. Faulkner had recently purchased for his expectant wife. A bold choice, to be sure, but the real drama began when the doors swept open to reveal the very wife he'd left at home, the radiant and regal Bryony Sloane. Penelope Vance went on to describe Bryony's entrance in breathless detail, calling her gown a column of emerald defiance, and her demeanor the serene calm of a woman who knows she's already won. The partnership with Donovan Knight was presented not as a date, but as a strategic alliance of staggering proportions. The worst part was the description of the auction. Mr. Faulkner, in a desperate bid to reclaim a sliver of his dignity, engaged in a chest-thumping bidding war for the naming rights to a hospital wing. It was a pathetic spectacle, like a poodle barking at a lion. And then the lion roared. Donovan Knight, with 2 words and a $5 million bid, didn't just win the auction. He publicly reallocated Mr. Faulkner's wife's destiny, anointing her the head of a new Knight-backed initiative. One has rarely witnessed such a complete and utter public vivisection. By the end of the night, Mr. Faulkner was left with nothing but a cancelled check and the ghost of a career. His phone rang shrill and demanding. It was Roger Davies' assistant. "Mr. Davies would like to see you in his office." "Now." The tone was arctic, promising an execution. The walk from the elevator to Davies' office was a gauntlet of shame. Heads ducked behind computer monitors. Conversations ceased as he passed. He was a dead man walking. When he entered the top-floor office, the view of Central Park was obscured by drawn blinds plunging the room into a corporate twilight. Davies was standing by the window, his back to the door. "I built my reputation, and the reputation of this firm, on 2 principles. Faulkner." Davies began his voice, a low, dangerous growl. "Strength and foresight. I expect my senior partners to embody those same principles, to project them, to live them." He finally turned, and his face was a mask of cold fury. "Last night you showed neither. You showed catastrophic weakness by allowing your messy personal life to explode in the most public forum imaginable, making yourself, and by extension, this firm, a laughingstock." He slapped a copy of the Financial Times onto his expansive mahogany desk. The sidebar headline was stark: "Donovan Knight backs Sloan Initiative, shaking up urban development sector." "But that's not your greatest sin." Davies continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Your greatest sin was a complete, unforgivable, and bankrupting lack of foresight. Donovan Knight doesn't make investments. He builds kingdoms. He alters landscapes. And you fool, you handed him a queen. You had a direct, intimate line to a woman he clearly values, a woman of vision, a woman who is now his strategic partner. And you were too blind, too arrogant, too stupid to see her worth. You didn't just fail to recognize a valuable asset, you actively discarded it. You made us look like we can't recognize value when it's sleeping in our own goddamn bed." The termination was swift and merciless. He was to clear out his desk by noon. There was no negotiation, no severance package beyond the contractual minimum. He was a liability, an infected limb being amputated before the gangrene could spread. For Bryony, the days following the gala were a whirlwind of a different sort. Her phone didn't stop ringing, but the calls were from architects she'd long admired, city planners, journalists from national publications, and even an old professor from graduate school. "I always knew you had it in you, Bryony," he'd said, his voice brimming with pride. "You just needed the right foundation." She realized with a startling clarity that her value had always been there. Recognized by those who knew what to look for. It had just been dormant, overshadowed by Elias's blinding ambition. True to his word, Donovan was a partner, not a savior. He arranged a meeting 2 days after the gala, not in a stuffy boardroom, but at a bright, airy loft in Soho, with exposed brick walls and massive, sun-drenched windows. A temporary headquarters, he said, gesturing around the empty space. Think of it as a blank canvas. Your canvas. Bryony walked through the loft, her hand resting on her stomach. She could feel the potential of the space, the light, the energy. It felt like her future. It's perfect, she breathed. This is your vision, Bryony, he told her, his tone serious as they stood looking out over the bustling streets below. My foundation will provide the resources, the legal team, the financial advisors, the PR infrastructure. They are tools for you to use. I am not your boss. I am your ally, your first investor. Your success is the only return I'm interested in. His respect was a balm on the wound of Elias's dismissal. He saw her mind, her talent, her resilience, and he valued it. A week after the gala, a legal courier arrived at the penthouse while Elias was in the midst of the humiliating task of packing his bespoke suits and expensive trinkets into cardboard boxes. The courier delivered a crisp manila envelope. Inside were divorce papers. They were filed on the grounds of infidelity and irreconcilable differences, the language cold and efficient. Bryony was not asking for the penthouse or for a punitive settlement. The papers outlined a simple, clean break. She was reclaiming her maiden name, taking only her personal effects, and a small inheritance from her grandmother. She was also requesting a fair and structured child support agreement to be placed in a trust for their son, managed by a neutral third party. There was no angry letter, no final dramatic confrontation, just the cold, clean paperwork of a life being surgically excised from his. He slumped against a stack of boxes, the papers trembling in his hand. The lack of emotion was the most damning indictment of all. It told him that he was no longer worth her anger. He was simply a chapter she had finished reading and was now closing for good. The seasons turned. The city shifted from the crisp, golden light of autumn to the deep, biting freeze of winter. Elias's world, once so expansive, had shrunk to the size of a prison cell. He couldn't find a job at any reputable firm in Manhattan. The story of the gala had branded him. He was eventually forced to take a junior position at a small second-rate development company in New Jersey, a soul-crushing commute to a job that was a shadow of his former life. He sold the penthouse at a loss to cover his mounting legal fees and moved into a sterile, soulless apartment complex that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Bryony, meanwhile, blossomed. Her pregnancy progressed, and her inner radiance seemed to intensify with each passing week. The Sloan Initiative was no longer just an idea. It was a vibrant, growing organization. She hired a small, brilliant team, including a trusted colleague from her old urban canvas days, and their first project, transforming a set of abandoned railway tracks in the Bronx into an elevated greenway for a low-income community, was already garnering national attention and praise never had and never could. "Donovan," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." He met her gaze, his own blue eyes gentle and full of a profound warmth. "Bryony," he replied, his voice low and sincere. "I should be thanking you. You reminded me what it feels like to build something that truly matters, not just something that's big." A comfortable, promising silence settled between them, a silence filled not with emptiness, but with unspoken possibility. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a very long time, Bryony Sloan was holding the pen, and the pages were bright, clean, and entirely hers to fill. Her son kicked a strong, steady beat against her hand, the insistent, beautiful rhythm of a new life, her new life about to begin. In the end, this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a story about reclamation. Bryony Sloane didn't just get even. She got everything. She reclaimed her name, her career, her strength, and her future, transforming a moment of profound betrayal into a foundation for a life of purpose. It's a powerful reminder that our lowest moments do not have to define us. Sometimes the demolition of the life we thought we wanted is the necessary first step to building the one we were always meant to have. True power isn't about the applause you receive in a crowded room, but the quiet, unshakable value you build within yourself. If Bryony's journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of resilience to turn the tables on injustice, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of karma, justice, and empowerment. Click the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of inspiration. Thank you for listening.